Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Your Greatness. This is your host, Ben Mumme, and today I am joined by a new guest today, and his name is David Zinger. So for those of you that don't know David Zinger, he is a speaker, educator, author, consultant, and coach who specializes in leadership and employee engagement. David founded the Employee Engagement Network, an online community with over 7,000 members dedicated to improving employee engagement. He has worked with organizations like RBC Canada to enhance employee engagement and foster positive workplace cultures. So David, without further ado, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, Ben. It's a pleasure. I look forward to speaking with you.
Same here. Super pumped. I kind of want to start off just for my listeners, tell us a little bit about yourself, David. Where did you spend your formative years growing up? And what inspired you to become a world-class speaker, educator, and leader in employee engagement?
Well, we had a previous conversation, and so maybe to go a little bit on a different tack, I love pinball. I loved pinball when I was, probably starting at about 10. And just to get a replay and to play that game, and, you didn't have a lot of control, but you had some control. You could shake the machine a little bit, but not too much. You could flip in certain ways. And it was just a very, very engaging game. And why I bring that up is that I think a lot of my life career has been much like pinball. I'm not in total control, but I love what I bump into. I'm ready to see some random things occur. I have some influence over what goes on, and some things just happen to me.
That's awesome. And it's funny that you mentioned that too, because even from our first conversation when we hung out last week, you really came off as someone who is really curious, really also, I think, passionate for like self-growth. And so it really kind of came out that way. But at the same time, seems like you've always had fun as well, and that you have a good sense of humor. So that's something that I really enjoyed, when I met with you last week. And I think we'll get a feel for that in this interview. So before taking, a deeper dive into this chat, I think it's important, for my listeners to get a better understanding of employee engagement. So how would you define employee engagement, and why does this matter to you?
Well, it originated in I think it was 1989, and an academic by the name of William Kahn really was the first, and he called it personal engagement. And then Gallup kind of followed suit and really popularized the term, and then it just gathered momentum and is still a big topic today. I think most employees see it as a survey. Oh my God, here's one of those surveys coming again. And it lacks the meaning and robustness to make a difference for many employees' lives. I see engagement simply defined by 8 words: good work done well with others every day. So you don't have to do great work. I like great work, but it's a byproduct of good. I can do good every day. I may not be able to do great more than once or twice in every couple of years. Done well is that you bring your full attention to it with others. So there's always others. Even if you're a writer or just a solo blogger, there's your audience, people, everybody influences it. And I love the idea of every day. You know, um, if you're disengaged today, that doesn't mean you're disengaged tomorrow. And it really, it's a little bit of acknowledgement to the Buddhist perspective on impermanence. Just because you're engaged doesn't mean you're going to stay engaged. And just because you're disengaged doesn't mean you're stuck there. And I think that was the disservice in the industry, is equating engagement with a score on a survey done about once every 2 years. Come on. Engagement changes probably not only hour to hour, but maybe moment to moment.
I think that's key there, like those last words, like moment to moment. And I know that's something that you're really big on too, is mindful moments, being intentional. So a question that I have is, there's a lot of things, that could contribute, to employee engagement and like the culture. And I know you came up with 10 principles. So a question that I have for you, if an organization or even individual is, looking to improve or even enhance their engagement, what are some of these 10 principles and how could they be applied, to that individual or that organization?
We could go the rest of this interview on that. So I'm going to be cautious, and I'm also going to own to interference because I took a model of which was called the pyramid of engagement around employees, and I'm now working it on retirement. And so the blocks have moved, and some of the meanings of the blocks have changed. So, um, but pardon me, to go back to employee engagement, it's about knowing what you want. I always call it the Spice Girls phenomenon. Um, and their song Wannabe. So tell me what you want, what you really, really want. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want. The organization and the individual need to come together like a Venn diagram that's joined. Um, that needs to come together. Engagement is something specific. Uh, I'm engaged in my interview with you right now. In a while, I'll be engaged in a small writing project. Then I'm walking with my brother. He's in Calgary. I'm in Winnipeg, but we talk about once every week or every couple of weeks, and I'll be engaged in that. So it's a phenomenon that shifts. But in the workplace, perhaps uh, the most important thing is how we step up to progress and setbacks. Teresa Amabile, or Amabile, really did a good book called on progress and really showed how important progress was and also showed how important stepping up to setbacks are. In fact, I think setbacks may be more important than progress. Is what do we do when we have a setback? Who do we talk with? How do we get back up again? What do we learn from it? Those kind of phenomenons are very key. So uh, if anybody's interested, I have a 50-page booklet called The Pyramid of Engagement that takes each of those blocks, and anybody's welcome to it. It's not for sale. It's just email me or email you, and we can pass it on to them.
Absolutely. No, for sure. And so what is, an example of a setback that either it could be a personal experience for yourself, or it also could be, maybe an example of an organization that you worked with that was so large, yet so also, how do I say, it was also an opportunity, right? To learn from and to grow. So what is an example that you'd want to share?
Well, the one that everybody knows is COVID. COVID changed the amount of setbacks we had with COVID, the loss, the upheaval, the amount of people working from home, people who redefined their careers, people who stopped working altogether, um, huge amounts of money in CERB and what that meant and what was going on. Organizations not sure how to deliver services or get food to you, people within healthcare putting their lives at risk at times. It was a gigantic setback, probably the biggest setback I've ever experienced at 68 years of age. Um, and yet, as we go on, some people are being transformed by it. Some people are making changes. Some people have gone back to the way things are. There's the old saying, he got on his horse and rode off in all directions at once. And I think when you look at COVID, it's gone in all kinds of directions. And some people have really, it's made a huge difference and a real positive influence in their life. And some people have been so devastated and so traumatized by it, it's going to be a part of their life for the rest of their life.
Absolutely. So then my next question that I have is, when we're going through something really challenging, and I think COVID was a great example, there's two ways that we could approach it, right? We could survive or we could thrive. So what are some, mental fitness tools or practices or kind of routines that you would advise, someone, to use to choose that option of thriving rather than surviving?
I guess first, before we go there, it's okay to survive. Like, I hope if someone listening to this or whatever doesn't feel that they have to thrive, it's an invitation to thrive, and that's the first key is to really experience it all that life offers is an invitation. We're free to decline the invitation. There's consequences for it. And sometimes, when you're going through something tough, the best thing you could do is just really experience how really tough it is. But just because you're there doesn't mean you stay there. You may make a shift, you may reach out to people, all kinds of things can happen along the way. So I guess I'm very influenced by Eastern thought. One of the most important things for me and for many, I think, is impermanence.
Mm.
Uh, Regardless of how tough it is, it's not going to last as it is. It's going to change, and you're going to change. You don't even have to do anything. It's just change indeed will occur. And I don't know if you're familiar with Martin Seligman's learned optimism. I was just thinking of this a day or two ago. Um, Optimists tend to see things that happen as caused by them, as being pervasive, and as also being permanent. And when a bad thing happens, an optimist will say, "This is bad," but they tend to see it as temporary. They tend to see it as specific, and they tend to see it as not permanent. Um, so that sense of permanence, that sense of change will occur, is important. And going back to how we started this interview, Ben, is pinball. You can shake the machine and you can flip a little bit, and some things can happen along the way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy, the whole pinball analogy. And I also think too, your comment on, embracing it to be okay, to feel vulnerable or also connect with, surviving or thriving, whichever route you choose. It's okay to take either option, right? And I was also able to resonate a lot with your last point on on being optimistic, because I definitely feel that I am very optimistic, but sometimes when things are more challenging, I get more frustrated. Like why am I feeling this way, and how come, and what am I doing differently, right?
Yeah.
So a question that I have for you is, what are some writing prompts, or, even, yeah, I would say, what are some writing prompts that we could use, whether we are embracing, our current emotions or whether we are looking to make change?
Oh, Peter Albo, I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He was a brilliant teacher of writing, and he developed something called free writing, and lots of people have borrowed from it and call it by different names. But the biggest prompt is to write without being critical. So I see creativity as a two-step process. Step one is to create, and the attitude we bring to that is believe. Step two is to evaluate, and the attitude we bring to that is just the opposite, is to doubt. And when we're writing, certainly first drafts or writing in a journal or whatever kind of writing we might be doing, is to stay in step one. If you take both steps at the same time, you're going to split your crotch and hurt yourself. You want to take one step, be conscious of taking that step, and then stop if you're going to write for publication or something else, and then evaluate and doubt and carry it on. So I really am indebted to Peter Albo. He wrote a book called, I think it's Writing with Power, and another book called Writing Without Teachers. This was years and years and years ago, but so influential.
I really appreciate those questions. In fact, I'm even going to add them to my toolkit, because I definitely think just this topic that we've been talking about, that I've been feeling it lately. So I definitely appreciate that. And, something that I want to shift to is, I know another topic that's related that you have a lot of experience in is burnout, and that's kind of a challenge, right? That's kind of an upset
Yeah.
matter. But, you know, from your experience, working with many organizations and individuals, how does someone know when they're going through burnout, and, what are different types of burnout, and what can they do, to, make sure that it doesn't go down that slope the wrong way, where there's okay burnout and there's not okay?
Who, once again, a huge topic. Once again, I'm influenced by Christina Maslach. Wrote a great book back in the '80s called "Burnout: The Cost of Caring." It was a picture of a heart with flames coming out of the top on the cover, and that's what caught my eye. Um, but she's probably the leading researcher in burnout, and has much to say. So basically, there's three factors involved in burnout. It's that exhaustion, um, that 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 sense of low self-efficacy. What I'm doing isn't making a difference. I'm exhausted, and I think the one that really saddens me is cynicism. um, so if you're working and you've been working for 25 years and you're very cynical, you might not just be cynical, you may be burnt out. And you really should stop and take a look at that cynicism you have for the people you work with, for the work, for what goes on along the way. So that's the one that sucks you in a dark hole, a lot, and then you're exhausted and you feel that whatever you do doesn't make a difference. It's so easy, um, to get stuck there. Um, Arnold Baker, a great psychologist out of the Netherlands, has done lots of work on burnout and work engagement. And work engagement is almost the antidote to burnout. It's to find the vigor, um, and other factors that give life, the dedication to your work. And in many ways, not to be simplistic, um, it's trying to accumulate and use more resources than demands, to have a stockpile of resources, people, mental imagery, reading. There's hundreds of sources of resources to meet the demands that you're going through. And just one final kicker. When I was involved in counseling, what I frequently found is that people had resources and they didn't see them. I actually coined a term called resource myopia. And what I meant by that is you have resources, but you're failing to use them or failing to see them. And so you could ask a question, well, when you went through something similar to what you're going through now, what did you do then? Well, I did this and this. And you could sometimes see a light bulb go off in their mind. Oh shit! Yes, I could do that. And gathering those resources. But it's a complex topic. But if we bring the two together, if we bring engagement and burnout together, I think what's can really help, and people are going to not like this, some people, is to take personal responsibility, while knowing that there's forces accountable in the organization and others that are going to influence burnout. So burnout is not your fault. Um, but if you're going to make a difference around burnout, if you don't take responsibility for it, it's hard then to make any kind of change along the way. And somehow we've equated responsibility with fault. And that's not necessarily, those two don't necessarily or shouldn't be joined.
I really appreciate that answer there, David. I think it's extremely helpful, to people that were tuning in, on the topic of burnout. And, something that I want to kind of go back to here was we were talking about earlier on, about engagement, right? And employee engagement. And I think it's so important when we think of, whether things go wrong, like burnout, or whether, there's just a bad culture in terms of, how people treat each other, right? There's a lot of things that could go wrong, in someone's engagement work, and something that I admired, when I was preparing for this interview was it was really interesting, to fall upon, like the Zinger model that you've showcased. And I know it's huge and it's complex, but it does bring, an idea of thoughts of how we can navigate or think differently, to, solve this problem or kind of, make that mindset shift. So for the benefit of my listeners that are tuning in, I think it's a pretty amazing model that you've created. How can leaders or managers or even employees or the everyday person, use this model to feel fully energized and educated for engagement?
Just to try and abate some confusion is that I created two models around engagement, and the first was there was a circle and an arrow and stuff going through, and it was colorful and it was nice, but it was too complex. And so the model I really have defaulted on in the last 10 years or 15 years is the pyramid of engagement, dedicated to John Wooden, who did a pyramid of success. I just moved it more towards engagement. And one of the beautiful things about the 10 blocks is it only takes 3 blocks to make a pyramid. So you can use almost any 3 blocks as a focal point to actions that you can take, whether you're self-employed, an entrepreneur, you work for a company or an organization. It can really fall within your hands. If the organization adopts it, then you can work together. But if 25 years or 30 years working around organizations has taught me anything, is don't wait for the organization to do it. You might be waiting beyond your retirement date for them to get on board and do something around it. If being connected to your work, finding meaning in your work, getting progress, making a difference with the people that you work with, making a difference with customers, having a really positive, constructive, everyday experience of work matters, you can take a lot of control of that.
For sure, absolutely. No, I appreciate that answer just because I love how it's evolved and how you've simplified it, to the building blocks, and like the pyramid model. So that's super appreciative. And so David, something that I want to shift to is, you've done more than even employee engagement. You've found ways to foster creativity and make that interconnection. And so I know you wrote with, a mentor of mine, Peter Hart, a book called People Artistry at Work, and how this is interconnected. And so a question I have for you is people artistry and why should organizations care about this?
Well, people artistry is ground zero is Peter Hart. I mean, he's the first people artist I encountered, and that's where the term came from. I was touring his workplace, and he also had an art studio there. And we were in his art studio, and I was looking at his art. And then we walked around his workplace. He knew everybody's name. He knew something about everyone. He cared about everyone. And as we're just about near the end, I looked at him. I said, Peter, you're not just an artist, you're a people artist. And he said, what's that? And I said, I don't know, but I think you just draw out the best in others. I think your art goes beyond what you put on a canvas. Your art is the people that you encounter, and you draw out them. You draw them together. You draw them towards results and what you're trying to achieve. And so people artistry, simply defined, is to draw out the best in another person or a group.
I love that. And that's also, you see that sometimes pretty much in like leadership, right? People that put the person first mentality. I've said that a lot on this podcast. I also said this last week, when I was speaking with you, and how valuable that is, right? Knowing how to put the person, maybe before the athlete, or the person, before the student, or the person before the employee, right? And really, really connecting, and embracing not only who that person is, but also bringing out their strengths, right? Because we have both strengths and weaknesses, right? So bringing out the strength of them. And so another thing I want to go from there is, what are some, mental fitness practices or tools that we could use to bring out the best in people, by applying, people artistry at work?
Well, you're evidencing it. You're a people artist. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Even online, looking at you on a screen, your focus, your eyes are really looking. They invite. Your facial expressions are invitational. Your questions, I mean, you prepared. You're interested in the question, but you're not just interested in the question. You're really interested in the response, the inflection of your voice, the nature and the tone of how you ask things. So it may be less about a specific technique or tactic, and more about a sincere desire, or the curiosity or the desire to learn or to draw out. from that person. I mean, it's fascinating to me watching people around little babies, not little babies, but say, oh, 4 months to maybe even a year or something like that. And who plays with them? Who engages with them? And how do they engage with that child? And who just thinks there's no connection there? They don't do nothing. Um, and yet some of us will just about stand on our heads and snort milk out of our nose to get a child to laugh. Um, so it's really showing up and paying attention. You know, one thing I neglected, I spent 25 years of my life teaching listening because I taught counseling psychology, and primarily it's listening. One of the things I really didn't fully understand is that how much listening is a mindfulness practice. It seems other centered. It seems like it's something you're doing for another person or to learn or whatever. But true authentic listening is very much mindfulness. It's not that much different than meditation with a mantra or some other kind of practice. When you fully engage in listening, you have one heck of a powerful mindfulness practice, and it draws people out through people artistry.
I love that. Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. And I even think like, you analyzing, this discussion, and myself of what I've been doing with the podcast, definitely a great example. I appreciate that. And I kind of want to dive a little bit further because I know, when you wrote another book, on people artists and, drawing out the best of, others at work, you kind of captured these points, which I think are in 5 different ways, right? So recognition talking is one of them, rewarding giving, praise worth actions, appreciative listening, and acknowledgement intent. So is there anything else that you want to add? Like I know you just gave a couple examples, but to these 5 kind of points?
Well, I think it's embraced in that, but it's that sense of caring. Caring is the most important thing. Sometimes people wonder why placebos work. Well, why does someone, if they're given a sugar pill, get better sometimes? Why in treatment conditions or experimental conditions, why sometimes does the placebo group, and as placebos are done in so many different ways, why did they get better? And I think it's one simple explanation I have for that is it's caring made tangible. The caring of the doctor or the experimenters by giving that placebo is showing a level of caring that has an influence on the other person. So that caring is really a key. It's interesting as you talk about people artistry, it feels it feels to me something from the past that's valid and usable, but I'm about 30 steps away from that these days. It's
Mm,
one thing I never really did was take something in my life or my career and just really run with that. I mean, I
mm.
I kept moving on because being a pinball, I would bump into something. I said, well, my, isn't that interesting?
Makes sense. No, 100%. Um, so, another thing I want to go with off of that is, also in your book, you had the pleasure of interviewing, some pretty amazing, people artists, and I know we already spoke about Peter. But there was at least a handful of names, and a couple of them that I have on the top of my head, is Henry Mintzberg, you also had Rose Essay. So a question I have to you is like, are there any memorable highlights or even stories that you want to share, where they really demonstrated, people artistry in the work that they did?
Well, I think in some ways, if I think about the people that we chose or I chose to interview, um, their life is artistry. Their life is people artistry. I'm not trying to get away from the, like, I love the specificity and the tangible example, but as I think about that group as a collective, it really was a way of being. If we go back to Peter Hart, um, it wasn't so much that he gathered tactics or practices or whatever. I'm sure there's things he learned along the way, but it was an expression of his connection to his world. Um, and part of that world was caring for other people and drawing them out, drawing them in, and putting them on this giant canvas, which at one point in time was Rodot recognition, and it's changed and altered, and he's retired now, and so that's changed and altered. But if you go into the studio, you'll still have Peter Hart, and he'll probably draw out something very interesting from you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with you. And that makes me think too, you've talked a little bit about retirement, and that's an example of someone that's going through it. There's probably some of my listeners as well, like my father or other people that are tuning in, that are in that retirement phase.
Yeah.
And I know you're really passionate about this right now. We had that on a call last week because now in the work that you've been doing, for the last 48 years, your work has been evolving, right? And so now you're at a time in your place where you're thinking more of not only retirement for yourself, but even others, maybe your friends, right? So a question I have for you is, what is the word retirement to you? And what do you see yourself doing, to help others, maybe have a better way of how do I say, going through that transition phase of, working full-time job or working for themselves full-time at a high level rate and now transitioning to retirement?
It's a good question, and I think I shared with you before that in all the work I did, whether that was teaching at university or being a global speaker or a writer, Groucho Marx's line always came to me: I'd never want to join a club that would accept me as a member. I never quite, as much as I worked at it, I never wanted to be a member of it. I don't know. I'm still confused by that, so I'm not sure I can add more clarity to it. But with retirement, I'm very delighted to be a member of retirement, and I really am interested in the psychosocial um, experience of retirement, and engagement is such a key word that one of my hopes with that pyramid of engagement, which has now become a pyramid of engaged retirement, is that more people will adopt it because it's under their control. They might have thought when they were working, their experience of work was more influenced by the organization or something. Where hopefully this is something that's going. It's a hot topic. Almost every day as I do research, I encounter another person who's now writing a book or working on retirement, and I think it's going to be hot until at least 2030. So that's probably about the run of work that I want to do in regards to that topic. So first off, it comes back to what we talked about before. I would like people who are just surviving retirement to be okay with that. And I would like people who want to thrive in retirement to know some mechanisms or steps that they can take to do that. I want them to know, so 10,000 people in North America retire every day. They live approximately 10,000 days. So there can be 10,000 different experiences of retirement every day. And not only from individual to individual, but within the individual. So a lot of people, when they retire, woo, yeah. And then, oh my God, like they miss the banter of the workplace. No one's really asking them for the things that they used to offer. Um, and there can be a lull or a gap or a downturn or a setback, if you will. Um, but for most people, by about 18 months, they've gone through that major transition through a bunch of endings, and they would report a level of happiness. Some of the research I've encountered is that the 60s, the age of 60s, are for many people the most happy decade of their lives. So, so there's tremendous potential and opportunity and things going on along the way with that.
So what are some things that you've been enjoying so far in your retirement?
Once again, not feeling compelled that I have to complete something. So I'm working on a book and I'm working on a website, but I'm not working on it all that much because there's other things that interest me at this point in time. So I'm doing something, and there will be something that comes from it, but that's okay. My wife just retired, um, so it's the flexibility that we can go and do things when we want. Um, we were in Brazil for 3 weeks. My son lives down there, but we were down there, and then we were in Egypt for 2 weeks, and then we're off to um, Nova Scotia for the first 2 weeks of June. We're talking about other travel. So I love to travel, and my wife loves to travel. So that's something also good. But I'm also doing work around grief and loss and palliative care. I've had some friends, good friends, who have died and become others have become widows, and to be able to live that experience, I wouldn't wish those experiences on anyone, but but that's what you have, and so are you willing or able um, to live it, to really live it? Um, I was at a funeral recently, a man who's so vivacious, so alive, um, and halfway through the celebration of life, I was feeling jealous of his life. Oh my God, what have I done? I've done absolutely nothing. Um, and yet there was a moment, a very quiet moment, um, when people were having little sandwiches and a drink, that I saw his widow just kind of sitting off in the corner on a bench, and some tears in her eyes. And that was the most alive thing I actually felt that day, to see that. Um, so I have a hard time explaining that, but working with people who are dying, working with people who have grief and volunteering and doing those things, it really touches the fundamental core of what it means to be human. And so that's part of retirement. And frankly, um, I'm wandering a bit here, but frankly, lots of people will do financial planning workshops, but not a lot of people do psychosocial elements around
Mm.
retirement. And I think you start to touch death, and if you're not comfortable around death, um, some of the elements around retirement are going to be a very big challenge for you.
Absolutely.
I went deeper than I expected to go, but
No,
that
I really enjoyed that perspective because it makes you think, when someone is in their early years, right? They're having challenges of learning how to speak, learning how to walk, right? And now in your older years, it's very different. It's more, it could be, now that bone of yours or that muscle, right, is shrinking
yeah.
or, injured or whatever, right? Or we have kind of like some of the things that you said, some great people that are around you that are now unfortunately passing away, right? And that's grief and that's hard, right? So there's a lot of it's, different challenges, right? Very, very, very different. But at the same time, something that you had, mentioned at the beginning is you also have more slow living, right? So when you look at like a millennial right now, most millennials are working really, really hard. They're working a quick, 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 quick day, and sometimes they don't take a breath to slow down and take a breath and think about, what they're doing. So that's another thing too, is there could be also that opportunity in retirement of slow living time, right? So there's fast paced time and slow living time. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges there for sure. And I'm glad that you've embraced, those moments of, accepting, time that's at a slower pace, which is nice.
Yeah, I worry about that a bit. That um, you don't have to be retired to find those moments, and to dwell within those moments. And I certainly have lived and dwelled in many of those moments. In fact, I think I shared with you last time, I retired at 23 because a World War One veteran said he was too old and sick to retire, and a guy my age should retire when I was 23. So I did for about 7 or 8 years, and people couldn't figure out how could you be retired and you're like 23. Um, Retirement is a bit of a state of mind, and then there's some financial considerations and there's some social considerations. But you can be retired and be an entrepreneur. You can be retired and working. And in fact, what we're seeing is a lot of people, sometimes because they have to, and sometimes because they choose to, are working as much, if not more, in retirement, sometimes for income, sometimes not, than they did when they before they were retired.
Yeah, no, for sure. And something that I'm thinking about is, if you had, a lesson that you'd want to share, with your, let's say, 29-year-old self, because I'm 29 years old,
Okay.
what would that be? What would you share? Because, you got this wealth of years of experiences in your life. What would that be that you'd want to share to a 29-year-old like me?
I guess stealing from many Buddhist writers would be to experience whatever that you have in life as many times as you can every day, to really experience it. If you go through a relationship breakup, that's a hard thing. But what I would really wish for you is that you could experience it. You could experience the pain, the loss, the worry, the fear, the happiness, the good memories, all those things. And so I think what I would wish for anyone, whatever age they are, and little children are the best at it. I'm glad you brought up children and people are getting old and tied those two together, is to experience what what life what life brings you, and as opposed to judging it or evaluating it, or this is good and that's not good, or I can't wait till this is over. And having said that, there's lots of times I can't wait till a meditation I'm in is over. There's lots of times I'm on a exercise bike for 11 minutes and I want it to be over. um, and so it's never like I'm going to get it fully, but every so often I can at least smile at myself and say, oh yeah, there we go again, and experience it. Even just like a second of experience will beat just about anything else.
Totally. No, I totally agree. And so a question that I want to ask you now that I ask a lot of guests on my podcast is, really the purpose of the podcast is to, inspire millions of people across the world, to achieve greatness and enhance their overall personal well-being. So I'm curious to know, what is your definition of greatness?
Haven't really thought about the detail of it because I was always kind of opposed to greatness because it was interfering with good. Um, Once again, I guess I'll go Eastern on this. Is that is to live as fully as you can and within the moments that you have, and regardless of what those moments are. Th- uh, 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 That 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 asks so much to be able to do it, and it's an invitation. It's not, you don't have to do that, and there's going to be lots of times you don't do that, and that's okay. Um, and you're okay, and can you make friends, not only with others but yourself, along that that path.
Totally. No, for sure. Yeah. No, I think moment to moment is a good way of phrasing it. Everyone has their own perspective too on, what is their full potential and what they're trying to live or take on each moment. And I think moment to moment, we could choose if we want to be great or good, it's just an option of choice of kind of what you see is great to you, and I've seen people in my life that are incredible fathers, just so great, and how do you measure that? How do you compare that? Well,
Yeah,
you can't, it is who they are, and they choose to do that. And I think that's amazing. So whatever it's in, it's a matter of choice and moment to moment, I think. But the next question I want to go to, David, is, now that you have a good feel of the podcast, what it's all about, who is a future guest that you would like to see on the show?
I not so much a future guest, but I was flying back from Egypt, And on Netflix, there was a special with Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama in
Mhm.
conversation. And they got together for a week and they did a 1 hour documentary. Um, my God, that was something. It, they were 8-year-old boys. They were 8-year-old boys together. They were always touching one another. They were teasing one another. They were so playful. And yet, what Desmond Tutu experienced in South Africa, what the Dalai Lama experienced in Tibet, for them to have that greatness, that greatness was just so inspiring. I've got to go back to Netflix and watch it again because it was just it was so well done. So in regards to guests, is not one person that stands out in my mind right now as specifics, but I think that's what you're getting at. There's a greatness in each person, and you've got that capability to bring them out. Um, and so the most personal is often the most universal, and so whoever you can get that can be personal, um,
Mhm.
and uh, that will resonate with the universal greatness that I think you're trying to touch into.
I appreciate that. Thanks so much for, yeah, just adding that kind of recommendation, and I'll definitely apply it and kind of think of, some great people, with alignment, in terms of that. And so David, the last question I just want to ask you is, where's the best place, for my listeners to connect with you online?
Well, normally I would have said davidzinger.com, but my website got hijacked and 3,600 posts are somewhere in the ether or whatever. I'll find out in a few days whether we get that back or not. Probably probably the best place, well, the two best places is LinkedIn or Facebook. LinkedIn is my more professional self and more about engagement. And there's a newsletter called Hey Shrink and things there. So that's a good site. And there's lots of articles there. The Employee Engagement and Experience Network is now at 11,000 on LinkedIn,
Oh,
but
wow.
it's not really a group. They don't really interact very much. LinkedIn is kind of it's a misnomer. It's just a loose collective of people. And then Facebook, because I love photography, Facebook is where I put all my photography. So this brilliant, I think they're brilliant images from the Egypt trip. And so if you just put David Zinger into Facebook, there'll be a few other David Zingers there, but you probably it won't be hard to find me. If people want to look at some interesting pictures and odd thoughts and things like that, that's a good place.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I'll be sure to, add that to the podcast notes. And I didn't know that you were so into photography, and I think that's really neat because I am myself, and a mentor of mine who had an impact on photography is Peter McKinnon. You probably know who he is. He's a Canadian.
Yeah,
You know of him?
yes, I do.
Yeah, so that's awesome. I can't wait to check out your work and see some of those shots. And yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, this I'm not going to do an advertisement, but this Samsung 23 um, was all I needed for my photography. The lens is on there for nighttime and for video, and you can shoot it in raw files. I didn't even do that. Um, it's absolutely phenomenal to have that kind of device in your pocket.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, especially nowadays, kind of like you said, like shooting raw, the fact that I could do
Yeah,
it is insanity.
yeah.
Yeah, so David, I just want to take this last moment to really thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, and thank you for, adding your voice to the show.
Thanks for your interest. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you, Ben. And yeah, I think you're a people artist, and you'll tap into a lot of greatness wherever you go.
Thank you so much. Means a lot, David.